Okay, before we go off, we need to get on the record for a second. We got it. Okay. Wanted to let the parties know that juror number 11, Nathan Stein, informed the bailiff and only the bailiff that he recognized Dan Patterson as working as a security guard, I assume where he's working now. I don't plan on doing anything about it unless you guys want to at the end of the day. We just go forward the rest of the day. And if you decide wants to inquire, let me know. And we can do that.
I see Your Honor making eye contact with me, and that's,
well,
my request to the court would be outside the presence of the other jurors before Mr. Patterson continues with his testimony, that the court make inquiry and permit, in the court's discretion, counsel to do follow-up inquiry if this particular juror will accord Mr. Patterson more weight or less weight based upon recognizing him.
And that's what I plan on doing, but not till the end of the day. I think it'll just be quicker this way. We'll just ask him to stay behind. We'll talk to him a little bit, and we'll see what happens. I think it doesn't make any difference with the alternates whether he stays or goes. It's keep the same effect.
I guess worst case scenario would be he says something like, yes, I give him a +1 or a -1, and I told everyone else during break to do the same. And I don't think, I have no reason to think that'll happen. So I agree with the court's procedure.
That's all right. Let's bring up the jury. And don't let me forget, that doesn't need to be on the record, but I'll probably forget, so you guys need to remember. I'll write myself a note, but we'll see. I don't either. And I don't think so, but I'm not sure. Thank you. Bear rise, please. Great, we can be seated. Mr. Patterson, why don't you come on back up to the witness stand, please? You are still under oath. Have a seat. And Mr. Bogan.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson, if you have any difficulty hearing me or understanding me, let me or the judge know, and I'll rephrase and speak up. Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
I want to start our conversation visiting one of the topics you spoke about with Mr. Champagne, and that was some investigation you did on Middle Mountain Road on April 23rd, 2013. You remember talking about that?
Yes.
And safe to say, at some point on April 23rd, 2013, you had reason to drive up as far as you could up Middle Mountain Road, correct?
Yes.
And the reason that you did that is, as you explained in part on direct, was you had received word that Mark Redwine had been spotted driving up that road on April 23rd, 2013, right?
Yes.
And in fact, you had heard that it was Mr. Mike Hall who reported that Mr. Mark Redwine was spotted driving on Middle Mountain Road, right?
It sounds correct. I don't remember the name, who it was exactly.
Would looking at your supplemental report number 369, paragraph 1, help you refresh your recollection as to who the reporting party was?
Yes.
Permission to approach.
Yes. Yes.
Having reviewed your supplemental report 369, does that help you remember who the reporting party was?
Yes.
And was that reporting party Mr. Mike Hall?
Yes.
And safe to say, after you were armed with that information, you drove up Middle Mountain Road, correct?
Yes.
And you were able to make it 4.5 miles up that road before you ran into the gate, correct?
Yes.
And that's because the gate was locked, correct?
Yes.
And safe to say, you did not see Mr. Mark Redwine up Middle Mountain Road?
No.
I want to turn your attention to the searches that you talked about that happened in June of 2013. You testified several items were found. Is that correct?
Yes.
And safe to say, at least parts of your search in the third week of June were around the waterfall area on Middle Mountain, correct?
Yes.
And around Bear Eye Park, correct?
Yes.
And the Bear Creek trailhead that's kind of in a switchback on Middle Mountain Road.
Yes.
And you testified that it was Sheriff's Department and at times up to 70 volunteers, correct?
I think there was more than that.
It could have been even more than 70 if I hear you correctly.
Yes.
Okay. No. one of the items that was found on June 22nd, as you testified to, was a shoe, correct?
Yes,
And I'd ask the people to publish prosecution 308, please. And probably in that stack there in front of you, there's a copy of 308, but it's also on the TV behind you. I take it you see it, correct?
yes.
And can you remind the jury whereabouts you found, or that shoe was found?
It was found just not too far north of the gate, the Forest Service gate, on a ATV road that cut off to the west.
And were you the one who found the shoe?
No,
It was found by someone else on your team.
yes,
And if I understand your direct testimony correctly, the search party was instructed what to do when they found items of interest, correct?
yes,
They were instructed to inform you or other investigators,
yes,
and then you or other investigators would make a determination what to do with that item, correct?
yes,
And are you the one who collected this item?
I did.
And explain to the jury what you did with this item, please.
I bagged it after I put on my latex gloves, and I passed it to someone else that was going to take it to Elaine, to see if she could identify it.
And I'd ask the people to publish 310 as well, 310. Is 310 a picture of the shoe that was found up on Middle Mountain, but probably in the evidence room at La Plata County Sheriff?
Yes,
And was this picture taken after it was positively identified by Elaine Hall as being Dylan's shoe?
yes,
When you collected this shoe and when you observed it in these circumstances here in 310, you didn't notice any blood stains on the shoe, correct?
no,
And didn't notice any blood stains in the shoe as well, correct?
no,
And you didn't notice any soft tissue, any soft human tissue in the shoe, did you?
no,
Likewise, you can take down 310 if you like, thank you. Likewise, on June 22nd, you testified that a sock was found as well, correct?
yes.
Can you remind the jury where the sock was found?
It was just a little further up the hill, but directly across, in between the big rock and where the shoe was found.
And I'd ask the people to publish 312, please. And that's the sock that you've testified to that was found by your party on June 22nd, correct?
Yes,
And if the people could publish 313 as well. Same sock, but probably at the La Plata County Sheriff's evidence room.
yes.
And did you find the sock, or was it a member of your party?
It was a member of the search team that found the sock.
And you collected it though, correct?
Yes.
And describe for the jury what you did, please.
I photographed it, put my latex gloves on, bagged it, and it was taken back to the sheriff's office for placed in the evidence.
And the picture 313 was taken after the sock was positively identified by Elaine Hall and maybe Corey as being that of Dylan's, correct?
I don't know if they looked at the sock. I just remember the shoe.
Okay. Safe to say, when you noticed the sock, when this picture was taken, there's no blood stains on it, correct?
Not that I could see.
No hair or human tissue.
Not that I could see.
And the same for the shoe. There was no hair on that as well, correct?
Yes.
With both these items, I've covered a lot of these, but no human remains of any sort were found in the sock or shoe, correct?
Not by me.
you testified on direct that during these searches on the 22nd, 23rd, 24th of June 2013, that some bones were found, correct?
Yes,
And I believe you also testified that in at least one instance, one of the dogs that was with you alerted on one of the bones, correct?
yes,
Safe to say, to the best of your knowledge, no dog alerted on the shoe or the sock.
yes,
Yes, meaning the alert did not happen, right?
correct.
Thank you. Now, it was the next day, June 23rd, that some pieces of black, and you can take down 313 if you like. Thank you, counsel. It was on the next day that some pieces of black fabric were found, correct?
I think it was.
And that would have been on or about June 23rd, right?
Right,
And as you testified on direct, it was other members of the party that found the black fabric, right?
yes,
And then you're the one who collected it and made sure it made into evidence. Did I understand that correctly?
I photographed it. I didn't collect it.
Okay. Nonetheless, you were alerted to where the fabric was found, right?
Yes,
And then you responded, describe to the jury where that was, what we're talking about here.
there were 2 fallen trees. In between those trees, not far from the ATV road, right next to it actually, there was a spot where those items were found.
And the only items I'm talking about in this moment is the black fabric.
Correct.
And that's found where kind of like these 2 trees have fallen down, correct?
Yes,
And you responded to that area by the 2 fallen trees, and I take it a member of your team showed you what they had found.
yes,
And then what you did at that point is you started digging around that area with a stick, correct?
yes,
And you dug around in that area with a stick, and then you found other items. Is that correct?
yes.
One sec. Safe to say, some human remains were also found as well, correct?
Yes,
And how many of those remains did you find?
I didn't find any of them. It was a member of the search team that first spotted the clavicle.
And it sounds like, if I understand your direct testimony correctly, on the 23rd and 24th, you collected at least 3 bones. Does that sound correct?
Yes,
And at this point, I'd ask the prosecution to publish 330, please. And looking behind you at People's 330, that's the diagram you drew, correct?
yes,
Okay. And since I know we can do this on Acrobat, I'd ask counsel to rotate that image clockwise, please. I can show you how to do it, but I don't want to touch your computer. It's under view. And if we We can get it reduced so we can see the whole map, please.
What about it?
Oh, I'm talking to council. You're being great. Permission to move it.
Yes.
Thank you. To orient the jury, Mr. Patterson, safe to say the line on the viewer's right that I'm pointing at, it does this curve about 2/3 of the way up the right side of the exhibit. That's your representation of Middle Mountain Road, correct?
Yes,
And running next to that is another line that you labeled as ATV Road, correct?
yes,
And this orientation kind of is in keeping with like the compass direction. This way would be north, correct? And the bottom would be south.
yes.
Safe to say, as you testified on direct, the bones, the human remains were found after the shoe had been identified by Miss Hall and family members, correct?
Yes,
So at that point, once the shoe had been identified as Dylan's, this area around the ATV road and Middle Mountain Road became an area of high interest, like, correct?
yes,
You thought the shoe's been identified, there might be other clues here, correct?
yes,
And it's at that point thereafter that several other items were found, including other items that you said were by the quote unquote body dump site, correct?
yes,
And for the jurors, you drew a picture of the two fallen trees and labeled it body dump site, correct?
yes,
And likewise, on your map, we have the big rock, sock, shoe, correct?
yes,
And then we also have a couple of items labeled on the far left, correct?
yes,
And those are, in your writing, fib, short for fibula, correct?
yes,
And tib, short for tibia, correct?
yes,
So signifying that in your estimation on your map, these are where bones were found, correct?
yes,
And you collected the two bones that you drew in that picture, correct?
yes,
And you collected the shoe and the sock in that picture, correct?
yes,
And you collected the earbuds that were found in what you call the dump site, correct?
yes,
Now, I want to talk about some things that didn't happen during this search. Are you with me?
yes,
Safe to say, you did not measure the distance between the shoe and the sock, correct?
correct.
And you didn't measure the distance, you didn't measure the difference in elevation as well, because you said this area was very steep, correct?
Yes,
And you didn't measure the distance between the sock and the two bones denoted by fib and tib, correct?
yes,
And you didn't measure the distance between the shoe and the two bones that were found, correct?
yes,
Yes, meaning you did not do that measurement.
correct.
And you did not measure the distance between the sock and the shoe and the area you described as the dump site where the earbuds and other items were found, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't measure the distance between the dump site and the two bones that you wrote on your map, correct?
Yes,
Yes, meaning that measurement did not happen.
yes,
And you didn't measure the distance between any of these items, the earbuds, the sock, the shoe, the 2 bones, distance between them and the ATV road, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't measure the distance between all of those items and the Bear Creek trailhead, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't measure the distance between those 5 items and where Middle Mountain Road is the closest, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Patterson, did you make any measurements?
Not about where those items from each other.
Go ahead.
And by the same token, when we're talking about the smaller bone that was found, you didn't register those GPS coordinates, right?
They had already been registered by someone.
You collected this item as evidence, correct?
Yes.
And it got checked into evidence, correct?
Yes.
And you, as you testified, you were with law enforcement for a very long time, correct?
Yes.
And you know how stuff gets checked into evidence. Now, items of import found out in the field get checked into evidence, right?
Right.
And it's not uncommon for the GPS coordinates to be logged on the evidence log, correct?
Correct.
And the small bone that you put into evidence that you collected that day has no GPS coordinates on the evidence log, does it?
Not by me.
Well, not by anyone, correct?
I don't know that.
Would you like to look at the evidence log? To refresh your recollection.
I'll look at it. I didn't write the evidence log, so probably.
I'll draw your attention to item 190 on the Plata County Sheriff's Department evidence log 17401 discovery.
Okay.
Now, the evidence log denotes that that was collected by you because it has your name on it, correct?
Yes.
And there's no GPS coordinates there, correct?
Yes.
By the same token, a larger bone that was found that day, you didn't log those GPS coordinates either.
Correct.
And you did not log the GPS coordinates of the shoe, correct?
Correct.
And you did not log the GPS coordinates of the sock, correct?
Correct.
Permission to get that document back, Judge?
Yes.
Now, when these bones were collected by you, you had reason to believe they were probably the remains of Dylan Redwine, right?
Yes.
And at this time, I'd ask the people to publish prosecution 324, please. It looks like, and you testified on direct, that 324 depicts one of the bones you collected in June 2013, correct?
Yes.
And obviously, 324 doesn't show where it was found, but it does show that it's in a plastic bag, correct?
Yes.
And consistent with your practice, and as you've testified, you took possession, used gloves, put the bones in bags, right?
Yes.
And then they were transported to Durango, correct?
Yes.
And I'd ask the people respectfully to publish 302. And I turn your attention behind your right shoulder, sir. That's as you testified, an accurate depiction of some more remains, another bone that was found, correct?
Yes,
And 303.
yes,
Same remains, different depiction, correct? And 304.
yes,
And you followed the same process for this. They were collected and bagged, right?
yes,
Now, you understand that the law requires when law enforcement believes there has been a death and law enforcement finds remains, they're obligated by law to contact the coroner, correct?
Objection beyond the scope. Mr. Bogan?
This goes directly to the process they followed while collecting these items, the integrity of the investigation, the integrity of the evidence.
Why does it have anything to do with the integrity of the investigation?
If it's not being conducted in a lawful manner, that's something the jury could consider.
I don't think that is, whether or not that's the case or not. That's the objection.
You can go ahead and take down 303. Before any of the remains were transported to Durango, did anyone in the search party contact the coroner?
not that I'm aware of.
And once these items that you were confident were probably the remains of Dylan Redwine, was any effort made to preserve that area and keep people out of it?
Yes,
What were those efforts?
there were guards posted on the site overnight till we can come back and continue.
And guards were posted overnight so you could come back, continue searching. That was done after these items were taken down to Durango, correct?
Yes,
Was any effort made before these bones were transported to Durango to do any sort of archaeological or forensic excavation of this area by a certified forensic anthropologist or archaeologist?
yes.
And when did that happen?
That happened the next day when we went through the same site.
And that was done after the remains that you've testified about were taken out of the area, correct?
Correct.
So that process happened after all of the items of evidence we've talked about today. The earbuds, black fabric, 3 bones, shoe and sock were taken out of that context, correct?
Yes,
Permission to approach with a number of exhibits, Judge.
Yes,
And I'll once I get back here, I'll read the numbers.
it's fine.
I just approached the witness with what's been previously marked as defense 1546, 1547, 1548, 1549, 1550. I'm going to ask the people for the HDMI cable. And Mr. Patterson, I'd ask you to review all those exhibits, please.
I did.
And You've testified as to some of the items you found in June 2013. You found several items, correct?
Yes,
And one of those items included a beer can, correct?
I don't remember the beer can, but it's possible.
It's possible you collected a beer can.
It's possible, I don't remember it.
And do you recall taking the pictures in 1546 through 1550?
It looks vaguely familiar. It's a long time ago.
It was a long time. And safe to say you remembered all the other photographs you testified about today, correct?
Yes,
The photographs of the bones, correct?
yes,
The photographs of the earbuds,
yes,
the photographs of the
He remembers the other photographs.
and you vaguely remember this one, correct?
yes.
And you collected this item in evidence, correct?
I'm not sure, but I could have.
Looking at one of the evidence logs help refresh your recollection?
Probably no more than looking at this.
Permission to approach.
Yes.
I've handed you what's been marked as La Plata County Sheriff's Office Redwine Middle Mountain Evidence Log, dated Monday, June 24th, 2013. Looking to item 215, Miller Lite beer can, your name is next to that, correct?
Yes,
And the coordinates are noted on there as well, as in 50 yards north of the shoe, correct?
.50 yards north of the shoe. Yes,
And the case number there, S12-19697, that's the investigative number, the case number for this matter, correct? For Dylan Redwine, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is essentially reading this document into evidence. It's all hearsay, totally improper. Move this
I'm
charge.
impeaching with the document.
Well, no, you can, but you're not. Does that help refresh your memory at all?
no,
All right. If you want to impeach, you can.
So this document before you shows that an item 215 was taken into evidence, correct?
yes,
And that item 215 is a Miller Lite beer can, correct?
yes.
Why?
This is improper impeachment, Your Honor.
I think
He has to,
You haven't quite laid the foundation yet, Mr. Hogan, I don't think.
you're telling the jury today that you have no recollection of collecting a beer can, taking a picture of a beer can, and checking a beer can into evidence, correct?
I have a vague recollection of a beer can.
You have a vague, but you're telling this jury today
Today that I have a vague recollection of a beer can.
but you're telling this jury that you have no recollection of collecting that beer can, taking a picture of it, and checking it into evidence.
objection, asked and answered.
Nonetheless, you understand that a Miller Lite beer can was checked into evidence as item 215, correct?
Correct.
And that item was collected by you.
Yes,
And we know that because your name is next to it on the evidence log.
yes,
And defense 1546 through 1550 are accurate representations of the beer can, the Miller Lite beer can that you just said you checked into evidence, correct?
Objection, Your Honor. The witness has testified. He has a vague recollection.
I'm
Well, I'm going to let him ask. Do you know if that's a fair representation of what was checked into evidence or not?
is the best I can recall, it is.
move to admit 46 through 50.
You still objecting, Mr. Champagne?
Yes, I'd like to voir dire.
Okay.
Do you recall that there was more than one beer can collected into evidence during that search?
There was a lot of items, more than one beer can, soda cans, trash. There's a lot of things collected. and enter into evidence.
You have an independent memory of collecting that can?
It was a long time ago. I don't have a specific recollection of it, but it seems vaguely familiar.
Are you able to say if this is in fact a fair and accurate representation of the can that you collected or not, if you have only a vague memory of it?
It looks like something I would have collected, and I could have.
Your Honor, I don't think this is a proper foundation.
I agree so far. Do you want to try any more, Mr. Bogan, or not?
Yes, please. I'm not asking about all of the items that were collected on that date. I'm asking you about a specific Miller Lite beer can that you've already told the jury you checked into evidence.
Based on the log you gave me, it's apparent that I did.
Right. And there's that log. Then there's also the Master La Plata County Sheriff's Department evidence log as well, correct?
Correct.
And that denoted the GPS coordinates of the Miller Lite beer can that you checked into evidence, correct?
Objection, hearsay.
I think it's okay. I
Correct.
think it's been testified to already, hasn't it?
Different log, Judge.
Okay, all right.
There's a log that says 50 yards north. Is that what you're talking
No, I'm referring to the master log that says west 3728.798,
Objection.
west 107.
Hold on, there's an objection. You're objecting because he's reading the
Yes, thank you, Judge.
okay. But that's fairly meaningless to me. I'm sure it's meaningless to the jury, so I think it's probably okay. Thank you, Your Honor. He's just trying to identify it.
Now, the Miller Lite beer can coordinates registered by you in evidence was west 3728.798, north 107.31876, correct?
Correct.
And that was the same coordinates as the fabric, correct?
Objection.
Why?
Now, we're continuing down the road of hearsay, but this becomes an effort to place the item amongst other items that have previously been testified about.
Right.
Right.
And?
And I don't think he gets to simply read that into the record.
In six,
Well, this is, I mean, I guess if you want to, can you toothbrush? Go ahead.
Based upon our last 20 minutes of talking about this, you understand and you agree that a Miller Lite beer can was collected in this area in June 2013, correct?
Yes,
Collected by you
yes,
and checked into evidence.
yes,
And consistent with all the other evidence that you collected and observed that day, you took a photo of the Miller Lite beer
You're
can.
not gonna get to the photo, Mr. Bogan. That's what we just talked about up here. It's not coming in. I mean, we're not gonna stay another hour trying to get this photograph in. The jury knows there was a Miller Lite can collected at that location. That's really all you need.
You've testified that several items were taken into evidence June 22nd, 23rd, 24th, correct?
yes,
And some of those items included remains that were not human remains, correct?
correct,
Basically animal remains, correct?
correct.
Permission to approach, Judge, with exhibits that I'll number in a second.
All right, well, why is this relevant that they collected bones that weren't human bones?
This issue is going to be discussed in detail by experts on both sides, Your Honor, and I can make further record, which I think is more
All right.
appropriate.
All right, I think I know what you're talking about. But I want to mark before he sees them.
Oh, by all means.
All right.
They are Defense 1632, Defense 1634, Defense 1635, Defense 1541.
Okay.
And I'd ask you to review those pictures, sir.
Okay,
And in your search of this area, the waterfall, Middle Mountain Road, the ATV Road, Berry Park, as you've already testified, you observed, and you even testified on direct that you saw animal remains as well, correct?
yes,
And does defendants 1632, 1634, 1635, and 1541, do those accurately reflect photographs you took of animal remains you saw on Middle Mountain during these searches?
yes,
Any objection, Mr. Champagne?
No.
1541, 1634, 35, and 32 are admitted. Wait, go ahead, wait, go ahead and finish up there. Anthony. Okay, you may publish.
Thank you. Turning your attention to 1632, is that a good example of some of the remains that you found in this area?
1632? Okay, I'm sorry. You're
Yes.
right, you're right, you're right.
yes,
And safe to say, you know from living in the area, you know from doing investigations in this part of the world, that it's not uncommon to find these sorts of skeletal remains, correct?
correct,
And when I say skeletal remains, I'm referring to remains of animals. Not uncommon, right?
correct,
And that's because there's a bunch of animals up on Middle Mountain, deer, elk, correct?
Yes,
and apex predators who eat those animals as well, correct?
yes,
And in your collection and observation of animal remains on Middle Mountain in this area, you didn't find any complete skeletons of deer, correct?
no,
Didn't find any vertebrae,
no,
didn't find any pelvises.
possibly. I can't recall.
You don't recall, okay? And the same can be said of elk and other vertebrates as well. You didn't find a full skeleton, you didn't find a vertebrate, you didn't find pelvises, correct?
Correct.
In fact, when you did find animal remains, they were dispersed and not all in the same spot, safe to say?
Yes,
And by the same token, you don't recall collecting any animal skulls, correct?
correct.
You also testified on direct that you went on several investigations from a tip line, correct?
Yes,
And that tip line included information that you received or the department received from psychics, correct?
yes,
And you went on investigations to New Mexico based upon psychic tips, correct?
correct.
And you went on investigations in Ignacio based upon psychic tips, correct?
Yes,
And you went to Granite Peaks based upon a psychic tip.
yes,
And you went and checked out the river south of the casino based upon a psychic tip, right?
Why don't you list them all in one question, would you? Any more?
I went on a lot of them.
You went on at least a dozen investigations based upon what self-declared psychics and mediums and people who said they were talking to Dylan's spirit told you.
I went on many of them.
Now, you testified a little bit about your interactions with Mr. Redwine during the investigation. You remember talking about that?
I don't remember, but go ahead.
You talked about your initial investigation in this case, correct?
Yes,
And in fact, you even told the jury that when you start an investigation for a missing child or a missing person, you start at the residence, right?
yes,
And in fact, you even told the jury there's been times when children have been reported missing and you found them in the house, right?
yes,
And that's something you did in this case, correct?
something I did. I didn't hear that. I did that a lot.
And you did that in this case. You went to Mr. Mark Redwine's house and searched for Dylan, right?
Yes,
And Mr. Mark Redwine cooperated with you in that endeavors, correct?
he did.
And in fact, you even asked, when you did that search, that was just a few days after Dylan went missing, correct?
Yes,
And one of the things you asked Mr. Redwine to do was for him to show you his hands so you could determine if there were any injuries or scrapes or anything to him, correct?
yes,
And he did that voluntarily, correct?
yes,
And you looked at his hands just days after Dylan went missing and you didn't see anything as far as injuries or scrapes or anything of the sort.
correct.
And on that same date, you asked for his shirt and he gave it to you as well, correct?
Yes,
And he also cooperated with law enforcement when they asked for an iPod and an iPad computer. You testified about that, correct?
Yes,
And he had no problem with you obtaining his bank documents, correct?
correct.
And in fact, on November 23rd, he surrendered a number of clothing items to you, correct?
Yes,
And the whole time you're trying to find out where Dylan is, what you can do to try and get on that trail and solve this, correct?
yes,
So you're paying attention to what Mr. Mark Redwine is telling you, you're making observations in the area, you're paying attention to search and rescue, correct?
yes,
And you testified on direct that on November 23rd, search and rescue had determined that this was a runaway situation, not a missing child, correct?
yes,
Going back to November 20th, when you did the initial search of the house, you didn't find anything unusual in Mr. Redwine's house, correct?
correct.
Meaning you didn't find any evidence of foul play, correct?
Yes, and correct.
And you didn't find any evidence of,
You're done with that. Nothing of interest, right? Let's not go through everything, single thing you can think of.
if I can have one moment, Judge.
You may.
Nothing further at this time.
Redirect.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Patterson, I'm going to go kind of in reverse order, picking up on the most recent topics and moving back to counsel's cross-examination. When you searched Mark Redwine's home on November 23rd, what were you looking for?
I was looking for Dylan or evidence of foul play.
And the focus at that time, as you said, was looking for Dylan. Where were you looking for Dylan?
Underneath beds and closets, up in the attic, around the yard, anywhere someone could hide.
Was this a full-fledged forensic search of his home?
No,
How long did that search last?
maybe 10 minutes, not very long.
When you were searching on Middle Mountain in June, well, all the searches that you did up there, but especially June, would there have been any reason for you to collect an animal skull if you had found one?
If I recognize it as an animal skull, I would not have collected it.
Now, counsel showed you some pictures of other bones that were collected that were later found out to be animal bones.
Yes,
Is that a decision that you and the other law enforcement folks made in the field?
yes,
Did you send any of those photographs off to the, I believe you said there was somebody at Fort Lewis College?
yes.
Why would you have sent those off for her to identify as human versus non-human?
She's a lot more familiar with what the bones look like.
And some of the bones that Mr. Bogan showed you in the most recent photograph look similar to the bones that you later identified as human remains. Is that fair to say?
Yes,
And so you didn't, is it fair to say you were not able to 100% identify which were human, which were animal out there in the field?
yes.
You described that there were a lot of things that were collected there on the mountainside, right?
Yes,
There was like, I don't know, do you remember that there was a hat with the word Vermeer collected?
it sounds familiar.
Okay. And many of the things that you collected well, I should say it like this. Did everything that you collect end up having evidentiary value in the case?
Most of it did not.
Most of it did not. And how would you describe the area, especially near the ATV road, as far as things, being, human items being found in that area?
Lots of trash.
Lots of trash. Did you collect all the trash?
No.
Council asked you about, let me rewind, I'll strike that. Even the bones that you collected, those were later sent off for further testing, is that correct?
Yes.
And why was that?
To make a positive identification on whether or not they're human.
Okay. So as you're collecting these bones on the hillside there, up on Middle Mountain, you don't necessarily know for sure whether those bones were human or non-human.
That's right.
Would it have been your role in this investigation to notify the coroner?
No, I would notify a coroner unless I found a body.
And you didn't know if you'd found a body?
Not at that point.
And leading, this is the line of questioning that I got objected to and
Right,
sustained.
and he's cleaning it up. That's as far as it's gonna go.
There was a bone, number 190 from the sheriff's office. I later identified as a clavicle. Council asked you whether you wrote down a GPS location for that item. Are you aware of whether a different person may have written down a GPS location for that item?
I know we would have tried. I was trying with my cell, but the reception is sketchy, that area.
Council asked about the shoe and the sock. Do you remember the sequence of the days when and what time of day those items were found? And if you don't, I can refresh your recollection with your report.
I believe the day must have been mostly probably in the afternoon when those items were located.
The afternoon. How many days did this search go on? Do you recall?
No.
More than one?
Yes.
Do you recall in the sequence of days when the shoe and sock were found?
They were found on, I believe it was the first day that we started the search.
Okay.
Near the end of the day.
And you testified earlier that at the beginning of the search and rescue teams were strewn all over Middle Mountain Road. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that after you found the shoe and the sock, everything was concentrated down into that general area.
Yes.
Do you recall the day that the shoe and the sock were found, whether or not you had any dogs with you searching that day?
That day when the shoe was found, I wasn't with the dogs. Some other team might have been. I don't recall.
And then the shoe and the sock were collected.
Yes.
And then the next day, you were searching. Well, was it the next day that you were searching with the dog when you found the bone?
Yes.
So there were no dogs even on that area of the mountain when the shoe and the sock were found. Is that right?
Correct.
No further questions.
Anything from the jury? Counsel? Okay, there's several questions from the jury, Mr. Patterson. The first one, I'm just reading into the record. I don't want you to answer it, okay? And this question may or may not be answered later in the trial, whoever asked it. Where was Dylan's last phone ping? So the first question I do want you to answer was, did you see any flyers, about Dylan with Mark's, phone number? I assume it's phone number for contact information? And
I
talk to
saw-
them.
I think I understood, did I see any flyers in the area with, about Dylan? And I did see flyers posted about information looking for Dylan.
But did any contain, Mr. Redwine's phone number on it to call Mr. Redwine's phone number?
It's possible, I can't remember.
Okay. Can you remember when the tip line was set up?
The tip line, I don't remember exactly when it was set up. If you asked why it was set up, it's for the large amount of tips that we're receiving.
Well, just
I mean,
approximately, was it like a week, a month? Yeah, if you can answer.
it seems like within a week.
Okay. And can you drive an ATV on the waterfall trail? Well, first of all, do you know what I'm talking about with the waterfall trail?
I had to hike the waterfall. You couldn't drive an ATV down it. You could drive an ATV past it because it's right next to the access road.
Okay, so how difficult would it go from the base of the waterfall up to Middle Mountain Road?
From the base of the waterfall, that'd be very difficult to do that on an ATV. I don't know if it's possible.
Well, just in terms of walking also.
But walking, I was able to walk it, so you can walk it.
Okay. Was it easy, moderate, hard?
It was steep. It wasn't hard for me.
Okay. Anybody wants to follow up on any of that? You may.
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Nothing further, Judge.
Can this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
We'd ask that he remain under service.
Okay, Mr. Patterson, the defense may call you back. I assume they have your contact information, but if not, talk to Mr. King on the way out, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Next witness.
People call Martin Brenner to the stand.
Mr. Brenner, come up to the witness stand up here, please. And if you'd raise your right hand before you sit down. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Have a seat.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Can you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
Yes, I'm Martin Brenner.
And what do you do, sir?
I work as a sergeant for the La Plata County Sheriff's Office.
And for the record, can you spell your name, please?
Yes, MartinBrenner.
You said you work at the La Plata County Sheriff's Office as a deputy.
Yes,
How long have you held that employment?
since April of 2006.
And what's your role within the sheriff's office?
I supervise a shift in the jail at the rank of sergeant.
Thank you. Did you have any involvement in the search of Middle Mountain in June of 2013?
Yes.
Okay. Can you please describe that for the jury?
Yes, I participated in several days of searches where we searched a steep drainage near ATV Trail 812 with a group of people conducting grid and line searches through the area.
And were you how big was the group that you were searching with, just roughly?
I think it was around 6 to 10 people.
And did you have an investigator that you were assigned to work with?
Yes,
And who was that?
investigator Dan Patterson.
You said you participated in the search over a several-day time period?
Yes.
Okay. And can you describe the terrain that you were searching in for us?
Yes, steep and difficult to travel in, forested with mixed evergreens and aspen, sometimes very dense, sometimes more open, but with a lot of underbrush and downed trees and parts. Very rugged terrain that was difficult to move through.
And you described that it was off of an ATV trail. I think you even gave the trail number. Is that right?
Yes.
Is that, how did you access this drainage to search it?
We parked about 5.5 miles up Middle Mountain Road, where there's an intersection with ATV Trail 812, and walked in from there.
And that walk in, is that a difficult walk to get in?
No, it's actually on that section pretty easy until you kind of drop over the rim of the drainage to where it becomes steep. It's downhill from the road, but relatively easy to travel and not very steep until a significant drop off into the drainage.
Okay. And about how far down the ATV trail do you have to travel before you reach the rim and the drainage you've described?
Less than 100 yards, but then the ATV trail kind of stays above it, and there's a footpath that breaks off from the ATV trail that heads right to the edge of the drainage.
While you were participating in the search, did you yourself, well, let me start here. Do you have any recollection of a shoe and a sock being found on the mountainside during those searches?
No.
Okay. As you searched that area, did you yourself discover any evidence that was later collected in the case?
Yes.
Okay, please tell us about that.
So that was on Monday, June 24th.
Okay.
In the afternoon, we had been near the bottom of the drainage and did what we were calling a vertical line search, where we were spread out horizontal from each other with the search group, taking lines straight up and spaced closely to each other. And as we neared the top of the drainage, or the rim, I was at the left edge of our line, and there were other people to the right who were reaching the rim and then peeling off as they topped out, and I would have been the last to top out. And just slightly below the rim, I saw something between a couple downed trees that caught my eye.
If I showed you an image of that area, would you recognize it?
Probably.
I'd like to approach with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 331. If I may, Your Honor?
You may.
You recognize that, sir?
Yes.
And what is it?
That is the space between the two downed trees, just below the rim of the drainage.
Okay. And this point, is that a fair and accurate depiction of that area?
Yes.
Move to admit Exhibit 331, Your Honor.
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
331 submitted.
And as soon as the TV fires up, we will move to publish it. All right, we've got image 331, Exhibit 331, up on the screen. Can you just, I believe there's a pointer up here. If you could step down, take the microphone off the stand. No, sorry, there's one behind you.
Right next to the TV. Right next to you.
There we go. And you can use that. You'll have to speak very close to the microphone to have it pick up. And if you need to extend that pointer out, you can. And just describe for the jury what we're seeing here in exhibit number 331.
Okay. So what doesn't come across in this photo is just how steep it is.
but we have two down trees. We're looking uphill toward the rim of the drainage, which is probably only another 50 feet above the end of the trees. Up around the end of the trees, and very large on the right one, was kind of the crown of roots, a large flat round section of roots that forms like a little bit of a wall. The larger tree with the bigger trunk was on the right when looking uphill. They're very close to each other at the top, and then again at the bottom of the space between the two trees, they come close to each other again. In between the trees, there's a lot of just forest stuff, mixed twigs, leaves, dirt, small plants growing in the area.
That's great. You can have a seat again if you like. Now, you said that this is a picture from below the rim looking upward. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you, in fact, approach this area on the ATV trail and then later on the, like, take the footpath off and go past this area from on top?
Correct. And on that initial approach to the drainage, because we had started when looking downhill very far left, we would have walked toward this and then curved to the left. And I never even looked that direction at the time.
After having learned later that this was an important area where evidence was found, and we'll get to that, from the top of this, from the trail, the walking trail, or the ATV trail, can you see this area that is described in Exhibit 331?
Not really.
Okay. But from underneath, it becomes very obvious.
Yes.
Okay. You said that you actually did search this area, and tell me, what level of detail, how closely were you searching?
At a minute level, like eventually moving individual sticks and pieces of bark within an area of a few square feet.
And as you approached this, before you had found any evidence, you know, how closely were you searching at that point?
We were probably spaced around 10 feet between people so that we could each look around an arm's length or so to either side and scan left and right as we went up.
Okay. And did you, in fact, during that initial scan, as you're moving uphill, did you, in fact, find evidence in this area?
Yes.
And what did you find?
The first thing I found was a small piece of black fabric that looked like the fabric in common T-shirts.
And how did you react when you found that?
I was a little surprised, and I stopped and didn't touch it, and I called Investigator Patterson to come over.
Okay. If I show you a picture of that T-shirt scrap, would you recognize it?
Probably, yes.
I'm approaching, if I may, with exhibits 290 and 291. Please look at those and tell me if you recognize them.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Are they fair and accurate depictions of what you saw that day when you found the T-shirt scrap?
Yes.
Move to admit 290 and 291.
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
They're admitted.
Move to publish 290.
Yes.
We're going to put exhibit 290 on the screen. What do we see here? What do we see in this image?
It's some black fabric, only a couple inches in length, that's tattered and torn, partly covered with the forest stuff and intertangled with it. Now,
that day, how many pieces of black fabric did you find? I mean, not an exact number, but more than one?
Yes.
Okay. Is this representative of what those black fabric scraps looked like in the field?
Yes.
Was it sitting up on top like this, that first piece that you found, or was it buried underneath a little bit more?
The first piece that I found, I think, is what's shown in Exhibit 291, and it was slightly covered with some sticks, but still obvious that
Well,
it's
let's take a look.
mostly on top.
I'm sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. Let's take a look at 291 then. And you believe this is the first piece of fabric scrap that you found up there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And obviously, this is pretty zoomed in. What did it look like as you were sort of, were you on your hands and knees, or were you standing as you moved up the hillside?
I was kind of a mix of using my hands and feet because of the steepness and ruggedness of the terrain. On my feet where I could be, but honestly, I kept having to hold with my hands. And when I noticed it really blended in quite well, I think, because of the darkness of it. I had to do a double take to see that that wasn't just the forest floor that I saw.
So you said you called over Investigator Patterson. And
Yes.
do you remember roughly where within the two down trees that you found that? Or is that a bridge too far?
I think I do remember.
Okay, well, let's take a look at I believe it was 331, is that right?
Yes.
Can you put that back up, and maybe you can point that out to us for the jury? And again, use the microphone.
So this picture starts partway up between the two trees. And where I would have found that first fabric scrap would have been down near the bottom of the picture, somewhere in this greater area.
Okay, and you're gesturing to the bottom right corner of that picture.
Yes.
Great, thank you. You can have a seat again. Was that, were those two T-shirt scraps collected?
Yes.
Okay. And did you record any information regarding the location described in Exhibit 331 between the two down trees?
I did not. Investigator Patterson had a GPS unit with him to record that.
Okay. And do you recall whether that is included in your report that you wrote on this case?
Yes.
Okay. So he actually had the GPS device, and then you documented it in your report?
That's correct.
Okay. And that documentation in your report describes this general area of 331, is that right?
Yes.
So you find this T-shirt scrap, it gets collected. What happens next?
We continued searching the area in finer detail with Investigator Patterson, and I think there was one of the search and rescue personnel who came over to the site also.
Okay, and so the three of you now are searching in finer detail. Can you describe the level of detail that you're talking about?
Yes, we each kind of took a section with me continuing on the lowest portion where I had found the T-shirt scrap and working my way left and right and slowly up at a level of detail of looking at in between the individual twigs and pieces of bark and plants.
And
So down to level of inches.
And did you find other evidence items in that area?
Yes.
What did you find and collect?
Something that stood out was what looked like a piece of bone, which was tucked under the tree to the right when looking uphill.
And can you indicate where on image 331 that occurred?
I don't think so, because I think it is out of the picture to the right.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. But it's the log to the right, and I'm sorry, you said it was tucked underneath?
Kind of right against the edge, yes.
And if I showed you an image of that, would you recognize it?
Yes.
One moment, please. Yes. I'm going to ask to publish Exhibit 298, which has been previously admitted. And so if you could just go ahead and take a look at the screen up there. Do you see the clavicle on that image?
Yes.
Can you point that out for the jury, please?
Right here.
Is that how it looked when it was found?
Yes.
And are you the person that actually found that item?
Yes.
Thank you. You can have a seat. And what occurred with that item after you found it?
I, again, called Investigator Patterson over to document it.
And was it collected?
And yes, then when it was collected, I put a nitrile glove on my hand, and I was the one who picked it up and then gave it to Investigator Patterson.
You said that you also found other T-shirt scrap material up there, is that right?
Yes,
And if I showed you the actual scraps of T-shirt, would you recognize them?
I think so.
I may approach with what's been marked as Exhibit 296. Do you recognize those items, sir?
Yes, I do.
And are those the items that you found and collected that day on the mountainside and on Middle Mountain?
Yes,
Move to admit 296.
No objection.
Submitted.
So you found the T-shirt scraps, you found the clavicle. Did you find other items on the mountainside that day?
yes.
Tell us what else you found.
Just to the left of the clavicle, fairly close to it, tucked in with a lot of forest stuff. When I was searching with my fingers, moving things, I found what looked like a tuft of hair.
And is that rough area visible on this image? Or perhaps on Exhibit 331? Probably not, if it's close to the clavicle, right?
It's hard to say precisely, but I think it probably would be showing on 331.
Okay, let's look at that image and see if, you, to the best of your recollection, you can show the jury roughly where it was found.
So to the best of my recollection, the clavicle would have been slightly off the image here, and the tuft of hair somewhere in this area.
Thank you. If I showed you an image of the hair, well, how would you describe the hair, if you can recall?
It was a small piece, maybe only an inch or so wide and long, kind of blondish colored.
Okay. And how did you collect it?
Once it was documented, I used a nitrile glove to pick it up, and then I turned that glove inside out and tied it shut and gave it to Investigator Patterson.
Okay. If I showed you an image of the hair, would you recognize it?
Yes.
You have a number, Mr. Champagne?
Do you recognize that?
Yes,
Now, granted, the image in 297 is in a different setting, is that right?
correct.
But do you recognize it to be the hair that you found on the mountain that day?
Yes, it looks the same.
Is that a fair and accurate depiction of the hair?
Yes.
Move to admit 297.
No objection.
297 submitted.
All right. Did you find other evidence items in that general area?
Personally, no. I did see some others collected.
Do you recall what those were?
Yes, I saw Investigator Patterson collected what looked like a shoestring, like you would see on athletic shoes. And I remember that there were pieces of earbud headphones that were collected, but not intact.
But of the items that you actually collected, this completes the set?
Yes.
Okay. One moment, please. No further questions. Thank you, sir. Mr. Bogan?
Yes, please. If the people could publish 331 again. And I'd ask the court permission to move between here and the
That's fine.
deputy sergeant, corporal, specialist?
Sergeant.
Sergeant Brenner, you testified on direct about this photo behind you as being an area up on Middle Mountain, correct?
Yes.
And it sounds like based upon your testimony, this is an area up on Middle Mountain where some items of evidence were found, correct?
Yes.
And you answered a couple questions about this area in general when Mr. Champagne was talking to you. Safe to say, the viewer's looking uphill, up 331, correct?
Yes.
And on the other side of those two fallen trees, that it's your understanding that's where an ATV trail is, correct? Or what's on the other side of those two fallen trees?
So, yeah, to paint the picture a little better, maybe I could describe it from the top down.
By all means.
So when you leave Middle Mountain Road and you walk down the ATV trail, it's slightly downhill and a little bit of a rocky and dirt surface. And less than a minute down the ATV trail, as the ATV trail curves a little, there's a footpath that breaks off to the right. That's obviously a smaller trail. And then not very far down that foot trail, probably a few dozen meters, as it curves to the left, you can see the large kind of root crown or root ball of the downed tree that's big, sticking up above the ground and kind of blocks the view downhill and to the right from there as the trail curves to the left. And so that would be the top end of the larger downed tree, which we see on the right in this picture.
Okay. Nonetheless, Middle Mountain Road and the ATV trail and the foot trail on the other side of those fallen trees, correct?
Correct.
Now, looking at 331, do you see any garbage, or do you see a bunch of garbage there?
No?
Okay. And walking down to this area, did you see a bunch of garbage?
No.
And reorient the jury one more time and go ahead and stand up where you found the black fabric.
The black fabric would have been near the bottom of the picture and in the middle of the area between the trees. So it's hard to say with precision, but I think it was somewhere around this area.
Both pieces of fabric that you found were somewhere in that area, or just?
Yes, the first one would have been the lowest on the hill, and then the others close but above it.
Okay. And can you tell the jury whether or not 331 was taken before or after that fabric was collected?
I cannot, but well, yeah, I cannot. I didn't take the photo, so I'm not sure when it was taken.
Go ahead and have a seat. And you were asked on direct if you tried to record or note the location of the black fabric. Remember talking to Mr. Champagne about that?
Yes.
And I believe you told Mr. Champagne you did not have GPS capabilities, correct?
That's correct.
But Investigator Patterson did, correct?
Yes.
And Investigator Patterson noted the GPS coordinates of the black fabric, correct?
Correct.
And as you noted with Mr. Champagne, you noted that in your written report, right?
Yes.
And those GPS coordinates were N37 28.798 by W 107 331.876, correct?
I would have to refer to my report to see what I wrote.
And I think anyone would have to refer to the report. Permission to approach with your report, page 596 of Discovery.
Yes.
I'm going to call your attention to fourth full paragraph. Does that refresh your recollection to what the GPS coordinates were of the fabric?
Yes,
And when I read them to you, was that correct?
yes.
And what were the last 4 digits of the by west?
The last 4 digits were 1876.
Thank you. Permission to collect that?
Yes.
Now, what instructions did you receive as a member of the search party regarding what to do if you find items of interest?
To call the investigator who was working with our team over.
And that was it? And then let the investigator make any decisions regarding what would be done with the item?
I think that's a distilled version of it.
What would be the undistilled version?
I honestly can't remember the whole conversation.
Now, you also testified that it's your recollection that other items of evidence were taken in this area. Remind us what those were and where they were collected to the best of your recollection.
Objection, Judge Ashton answered. Cumulative.
That's answered by him. I'm allowed to address his issues.
Well, yes and no. You can answer that question.
Okay. The other items which I saw other people collect in this area between the trees were uphill above where I was at, about 8 or 10 feet above where I saw the pieces of the earbud headphones collected and where I saw the pieces of what looked like shoestring collected.
And can you tell the jury where those pieces were found on People's 331?
I think so, yes.
By all means.
So farther uphill in this site between the trees, if I recall correctly, it would be up more in this region was where the pieces of the earbud headphones were found and the pieces of what looked like athletic shoestrings, just farther up in this general area.
And when you found the black fabric, Investigator Patterson came by, right?
Yes,
And then he started investigating that area, correct?
yes,
And he did so by digging around in the area with some sticks, correct?
could you rephrase that?
When Investigator Patterson started investigating this area, he started digging around with some sticks, correct?
By using sticks to dig?
Yes, sir.
I don't remember.
Would looking at your report help refresh your recollection as to whether or not Investigator Patterson did that?
Yes.
By all means, have a seat. And I'll move on from that. When we look at People 331, safe to say, let me ask a better question. How many crime investigations, crime scenes have you been to? You participated in, best estimate?
6 or 8.
6 or 8. And in your experience in doing crime scene investigation or investigations, have you seen where potential items of evidence are identified by the investigation team?
Yes,
And then placards with numbers are put next to those?
I have seen that.
You've seen that, you're familiar with that practice?
Yes,
And then once items of interest or evidence are identified by the team, these number placards are put next to them and a picture's taken of them, correct?
Yes, I have seen that, Tom.
Seen that. And that helps investigators and law enforcement know the relationship between different items that they find in an investigation, correct?
Yes,
And you would agree when we look at 331, there's nothing like that there. There's no numbers with placards or anything of the sort, correct?
that's correct.
You also testified on direct that you found what you believe to be a human bone in this area, correct?
Yes,
And it was wedged in between the dirt and one of the downed trees. Is that correct, if I understood your testimony?
that's correct.
And again, you saw that Investigator Patterson was informed, he came over, correct?
Yes,
And he's the one who collected that item, correct? Or do you know?
no. After he had photographed it, and done his documentation, then I was the one who put on the nitrile glove and retrieved the bone. And then once I removed it from where it was, sitting, I could see, its entirety because it was partially covered where it had been.
And before you collected that item, that bone, if you will, did anyone contact the coroner?
I don't know.
And how much time elapsed between when you found that bone and when it was put into an evidence bag and collected?
Maybe 5 or 10 minutes.
5 or 10 minutes. And before it was taken out of that area, before it was taken out of where I think you said it was wedged between the downed tree and whatever lay underneath it, was any sort of forensic excavation done of that area by someone qualified to do so?
No,
And was, before that bone was taken out of context, was any sort of forensic excavation done of that area portrayed in 331?
no.
Nothing further, Judge.
Redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Any questions from the jury? Okay, can this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
We're going to ask that he remain under service.
All right, so what that means is Sergeant Brenner is, you may be called back, to testify later in the trial, so give Mr. King your contact information in case you're needed, okay? Okay, thank you. How long is your next witness?
About a half an hour, Judge.
Yeah, let's take a break then. We'll take 15 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. Remember my admonitions not to talk to each other about the case. We'll start up again at 3:15. Thank you. Okay, we'll be in recess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you calling her and recalling her? Oh.
Nicole? Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. 3:15, right?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Sit down if you want, it'll be a few minutes. Hard stuff. Yeah, go ahead. We'll wait for you. Thank you. Yeah, we have a bunch tonight. There's a bunch tonight. A lot of them. Everybody rise, please. Okay, we can be seated. Mr. Champagne, your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The people call Joseph Gabbard to the stand.
Come on up to the witness stand, please. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Have a seat, but you gotta talk louder.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
Joe Gabbard. I worked for the Sheriff's Department. No longer there, working for Southern Utah Tribal Rangers at the time.
And just for the record, how do you spell your last name?
Gabbard.
You said you currently work for the Southern Utah Tribal Rangers.
Yes.
Can you just briefly describe what that means and what you do there?
Been there a little over 2 years. What we do is we're pretty much the tribal police for the natural resources of the Southern Utah Tribe.
Very good. And before that, you described the sheriff's office for La Plata County. What did you do there and how long did you work there?
Worked there for 18 years. Last part of my career there, I was an investigator, criminal investigator.
And sir, how should I refer to you now? Ranger Gabbard, or what's the appropriate nomenclature?
On duty, yes, it would be Ranger Gabbard.
Okay. Ranger Gabbard. Did you have any role in the investigation of Mark Redwine and Dylan Redwine?
I did.
And I want to direct your attention to the early stages of the case. November 2012. You recall that time period?
I do.
And during that time period, were you involved in any of the searches that were going on in the Vallecito area at that time?
I was.
And can you tell us about what your role was in some of those different searches?
Depending on the search, I was in charge of putting searches together, being in charge of people, areas of what was being searched, collecting evidence, logging evidence in.
Do you recall being involved in a search of Middle Mountain Road on November 23rd, 2012?
That I do.
You do?
Yes.
Okay. And what do you remember about that?
Serves me right. We tried to drive to the top of Middle Mountain. It was just too snowy. We couldn't make it to the top.
Okay. Do you remember who you were with?
Investigator Hendricks.
Okay. And during that time, did you collect any evidence relevant to this case?
Not during that search, no.
So November 23rd, it was already too snowy to get to the top of Middle Mountain Road.
Yes, it was.
Do you recall about how far you got?
If I recall correctly, it was a couple miles from the top.
So you were able, that's fine, thank you. Do you recall being involved in any helicopter searches of the Vallecito area?
Yes, I kind of set those up.
Okay, how did you go about setting those up?
I was already acquaintances with Rob Gross, who was the lead helicopter pilot in San Juan County, New Mexico. So I called him to see if he could assist with the search, and he was able to.
Okay. Do you recall, so were you actually on the helicopter?
No, I was not.
And did you give instructions to these helicopter operators or pilots to search particular areas?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall which areas you asked them to search?
The first search I remember was pretty much the Vallecito Lake area, Middle Mountain, and the rivers going into Vallecito.
Okay. And do you recall that being November 24th, 25th, 2012? Does that sound right to you?
Around that time, yes.
Okay. Were there other areas besides just Vallecito Lake and the inlets, so the rivers coming into it?
With other searches, yes.
Okay. And during that November 2012 helicopter search, did you also request them to search the Middle Mountain area?
Yes, Middle Mountain Road area and surrounding, actually, around Middle Mountain Road.
Were there other bodies of water that you requested them to search as well?
With later searches, I would have to refer to my report on the first one. I do know that we eventually went to Lemon Reservoir, Navajo, all the surrounding lakes up the Animas Valley. And they actually did Morgan Lake, which is right across the state line in New Mexico off of Highway 140.
Sounds like there were multiple helicopter searches that you organized.
Yes.
Let's just go back to that first one. If I showed you a map of the areas searched, would you recognize it?
Yes.
I may approach.
Yes.
Exhibit 496. Does that look like, well, I should ask you what you see there.
The Vallecito Lake area and Middle Mountain Road.
And, there's areas denoted in red on that map. What do those areas denote?
That is the lake itself, Old Timer Campground and Middle Mountain Road.
Are those, fair and accurate depictions of the areas you requested to be searched by the helicopter in November 2012?
That is.
We move to admit, Exhibit
Logan?
496.
No objection. Oh, excuse me. 496 is admitted.
Thank you. Move to publish, please. All right, I put that up on the screen for us. Can you just basically describe to the jury what we're seeing there in red?
So what you're seeing is the Old Timer Campground. Just to the left of that is the dam. It goes up to the north end of the lake. There is a road that goes to the top of Middle Mountain, known as Middle Mountain Road.
And the areas in red, do they accurately reflect the areas that the helicopter searched?
That they do.
Now, did you have any involvement in any of the searching of Lake Vallecito during the same rough time period, early or late November of 2012?
I did assist with setting up a dive team.
A dive team, and where did that dive team come in from?
They came in from New Mexico.
All right. And did they in fact dive and search the lake?
They did.
Can you tell us anything else about that, any more detail?
I don't know exact areas that they dove. I was on land, following up on other stuff, just trying to help them whenever I could.
Okay. So fair to say you arranged it, but then left them to conduct the search themselves?
Yes.
Did you have any role in arranging a sonar search of the lake in 2012?
I assisted with finding a sonar for them to use.
Okay.
Apparently they had one, but it wasn't there yet or something of that.
And at risk of taking you out of your comfort zone, can you briefly describe what sonar is and what it does?
Sonar is pretty much painting a picture of items under the water.
All right. Are you aware of whether a sonar search was in fact conducted in November 2012?
I believe it was.
As we look at 496 again, the dive team, the sonar, is that also encompassed in the red area covering Vallecito Lake, those searches?
Yes.
Was there another search of Lake Vallecito in the spring of 2013?
Yes, there was.
Okay. Were you involved in setting that up or any of the arrangements?
Wasn't really involved with setting it up. I went out with them on the water.
Okay. You were actually in the boat.
Yes, it was.
And any of these searches, the helicopter searches, the sonar searches, the boat searches in the spring of 2013, did any of those produce any relevant evidence in this case?
No, they did not.
And the helicopter searches, you said that there were other searches that were ongoing, is that right?
Yes.
Including a search of Lake Morgan and other areas. Did that continue on into the spring of 2013?
That it did.
And again, these helicopter searches, did those produce any relevant evidence in the case?
They did not.
As an investigator in the case, were you aware of whether any tips came into the sheriff's office during the early stages and ongoing throughout the case?
There were numerous tips.
And how were those tips handled?
They were kind of given out to the investigators to follow up on as they came in.
Okay. Did you handle tips yourself?
I did.
And what were the instructions or what was the strategy regarding these tips? How were you approaching them?
We would follow every tip. We would make contact with absolutely everybody and try to follow it all the way to the end.
Now, some of these tips that came in were fairly outlandish. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And why did you follow those tips, even though they came in and you were perhaps skeptical?
You never know. You got to follow it. It might produce something.
Okay. And did you, in fact, use that strategy in your approach to that work?
Yes.
How many tips do you think you followed up with?
Oh, goodness, I have no idea. A lot.
More than 100?
That'd be a pretty good number.
Okay. Did any of these tips help produce evidence that helped you find Dylan Redwine?
No.
As part of your role in the investigation, did you take any DNA buccal swabs from any of the involved parties?
Yes, I did.
And who did you take buccal swabs from?
Corey and Elaine Redwine?
Okay. Does Elaine Redwine also go by Elaine Hall? Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
And how did you go about that? Meaning, like, specifically, what are the details of taking a buccal swab from another person?
The swabs are individually packaged. So you open up the end away from the swab, pull the swab out, doing mouth swabs, gathering saliva from the cheeks. Then you insert that swab back into the package that it came in, and then it's put into a manila envelope and either put into evidence or sent up to CBI.
Okay. Are you taking precautions to make sure that the cotton end remains, uncontaminated and sterile?
Yes.
What type of precautions did you do
Um,
to that effect?
Gloved up, making sure that the swab does not make contact with anything else but the inside of the mouth and the package, inside of the package.
Was that the procedure you followed when you took the swabs from Ms. Hall and Mr. Redwine?
I did.
Mr. Corey Redwine. If I showed you those envelopes that you packaged them in, would you recognize them?
I would.
Let me approach with exhibits 332 and 333.
You may.
Would you like to see these, counsel?
You may.
Do you recognize those, sir?
I do.
And what are they?
They are the swabs that I took from Corey and Elaine.
How do you recognize them?
My writing and the remarks on it.
Okay. And now, are you aware of whether those swabs were sent off for testing?
That I don't know.
Are you able to examine the packaging to determine if in fact that may have occurred?
Yes.
Okay. And other than the packaging that reflects that, are they in the same or substantially the same condition as when you packaged them?
Yes, they are.
Move to admit 332, 333.
Mr. Moran? They're both admitted.
Thank you. I'd like to change topics with you, if that's all right. Did you have a role in acquiring phone records for Mark Redwine's landline in, I believe it was 2012?
I did.
Tell us about your role in that.
I wrote a search warrant to CenturyLink for his landline information.
All right. And why CenturyLink?
That was his server for the landline at his residence.
And you said you wrote a search warrant. Was that required by the company?
Yes.
All right. And do you recall which date range you were requesting on those records?
Requesting the 18th through the 20th.
Okay.
Of November 2012.
And did you in fact receive those records?
I did. The first time they came back, the dates got a little mixed up and we had to get the records again.
Okay. Did you eventually get the records that you were requesting
Yes.
for the correct date ranges?
Yes.
And that's the 18th to the 20th of November 2012, is that right?
Correct.
All right. If I showed you those records, would you recognize them?
I would.
334? You recognize those?
I do.
Do they look to be the same records that you received from CenturyLink during the course of your investigation?
Yes.
Do they fair and accurately reflect the records that you received from CenturyLink?
Yes.
Move to admit. Sorry, 334, excuse me.
Your Honor, I think that there needs to be a record laid for business records before this hearsay would be admissible. Objection.
Your Honor, these were subject to pretrial pleading by the people. We do have an attestation of accuracy from the custodian of records. That was filed with the court as one of our records that we sought to admit under 902, I believe it's B11, that's correct?
Okay, and I don't remember, I did do an outline of all my orders, but I don't
Yes.
remember writing that one down. Did I say this, that these could come in?
Judge, it's a notice that's required under.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
902.11, given the defense the opportunity to object, which they did not.
Okay. And we do have the attestation of records that will allow 334 to come in. Well,
I have the,
in terms of the admissions, I mean, they're here, and the attestation is to get around is the business records attestation?
yes,
I think I saw that
authenticity.
this morning. Okay.
Yes. And I have the attestation, if the court would like it, counsel wants to review it.
Mr. Moran, do you want to see that or not?
Please.
Yes.
Your Honor, I would note for the record, this is the purpose of the pretrial pleading and notice requirement under 902.
Right, and the attestation gets you around the hearsay rule, that's my understanding, so.
Hearsay and authenticity, Your Honor.
Right.
So,
So we'll see if they have anything to say about it.
Good, thank you.
So, oh, you're just,
This looks almost in order. It just doesn't list a specific phone number or a subscriber.
Your Honor, the format that
I'm
these
not sure
records,
what this is attesting to.
Mr. Champagne?
the format that these records take and an attestation is that the records are produced along with the attestation from the business that produced them, and the custodian of records who reviewed them for accuracy. And I would note, just for timeliness, that the purpose of the notice is for pretrial objection and hearings on these topics, not mid-trial. Happy to show these to Mr. Moran out of, courtesy during the case, but I believe any time for objection is long past.
The notice would be required, but you've still got to get around the hearsay objection with a proper attestation. And this isn't linked to anything. It gives me a date.
Hold on, you have had this marked as 335, correct, the attestation part?
Yes, Your Honor.
Get it?
I think I've reviewed it sufficiently if the court wants this copy.
I'll look at what I have. If I can find it, it was 335?
Yes, Your Honor.
Let me have that one. I've got your exhibits in two different areas, the way you guys gave them to me.
Our apologies.
This works.
And it was accompanied by the records contained in 334. I'm sorry, Judge, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, you did cut me off, but that's okay. My understanding of this is this has to be attached to the exhibit, correct? Or,
Well, Judge, they arrived attached when we received them from the company. We separated
well, we
them.
lay that foundation. So I think you have to have some testimony to that if there's an objection. Okay. And normally, don't take them off.
Okay, yeah.
Judge,
Judge,
wherever 335 is, do we have it? Is this it for us? Because I'm going to make it a court exhibit.
that's fine. That was yes, that's fine. That exhibit does not, I don't believe, need to be presented to the jurors.
That's why it's a court exhibit.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So, but I need testimony as to whether or not, how it came.
In that case, Judge, what I'd like to make the court aware is that this will be conditionally, we'll request conditional admission because the attestation was actually received by a different witness at a later time.
Well, I think because I'm going to have trouble keeping this straight. I mean, I will admit it once I have that testimony, but I don't think we can put it in right now.
Okay,
Okay?
that's fine, Judge. What I'll have then is the witness who received the attestation and the records discuss the records that they reviewed. Because
And
as
that's fine.
as I understand it, what you're telling me is this witness can't testify about these, or I can't publish them to the jury.
Correct. There's still an objection. I have to have that testimony first. And were this a different case, 3-4 days long, that wouldn't be a problem. Okay?
Right.
It's a longer case, and I'm just not going to remember.
Okay, that's fine, Judge.
I'll hang on to this for now.
Thank you. Sir, did you participate in a large-scale search of Middle Mountain in June of 2013?
That date sounds about right. I would have to review my report a little bit.
Sure. Maybe I can anchor it for you with a landmark. This was the search where the remains of Dylan Redwine were actually found.
Okay.
You recall being a part of that process?
I do.
And do you recall your role in that search?
Just leading search teams.
Okay. Do you recall that a shoe and a sock were found, eventually identified as Dylan Redwine's?
I do remember that.
Do you recall being, I believe it was with investigator Cowling, conducting a search and that you actually yourself found evidence related to the case?
Yes, I do.
Tell us about that.
We were doing a line search in the area, the general area of where some items were found, and we noticed some scat on the ground. We broke the scat apart and found what appeared to be a toe or a finger bone.
For those of us unfamiliar, you use the term scat. What do you mean, sir?
Animal waste.
Feces?
Feces.
Okay. So you were actually breaking apart pieces of animal feces when you found this, is that
Yes.
correct? Was this part of the normal pattern of searching when you were out there working that day?
It's a very grown area, grown up with shrubs and whatnot, so everything was getting moved and we were just breaking up everything that we could.
Okay. So this wasn't unusual that you were breaking apart pieces of animal scat?
No.
If I showed you pictures of that animal scat in the field, would you recognize it?
I would.
131, 132, and 133. Let me approach.
You may.
You recognize those, sir?
I do.
And what are they?
That is the animal scat with the bone.
Okay. Are they fair and accurate depictions of what you saw that day in the field?
That they are.
All right. Move to admit 131, 132, and 133.
Mr. Moran?
No objection, thank you.
You're admitted.
Motion to publish, Your Honor?
Yes.
Can you step down from the stand, using the pointer there, speaking into the microphone next to the television, and describe to the jury what we see in Exhibit 131? So is the microphone working?
No, so what we're seeing is the actual scat. This was, pieced together. This is what was broke apart to find this little fraction of bone.
And I'm gonna move on to 132. What do we see in this picture?
It's the same scat with the bone,
Okay.
the scale.
And how could you tell that this was either what you described as a possible toe or finger?
It's just the shape of it.
Okay.
We just knew that it wasn't right and needed to be checked.
Was there a nail, like a fingernail or
There
toenail?
was a nail on the very end of it. I believe.
Okay. Can you show us where that nail is on this picture?
It is right here.
Okay. And when you were out in the field, was this something that you found unusual?
Yes.
Were you able to determine at that moment whether it was human or non-human?
No, we had to have it tested.
Thanks. You can have a seat again, please. Did you record the GPS location for that item?
I did.
Okay. And how did you know that the GPS was, how did you go about that?
Running our GPS, and sometimes we would relate it to another GPS to see if the coordinates were the same.
Okay. And did you have a chance to review some shots of an animation, a Google Earth animation done by investigator Heidel in this case?
I did.
And did those look to be fair and accurate to the location where you found that coyote scat or whatever animal scat?
Yes, it did.
Part of your role in the case, did you develop contacts with any local wildlife experts regarding animal behavior?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall who it is, without saying what they told you, who it is that you spoke to?
Yes, I do.
And what was his name or her name?
His name was Drayton Harrison.
And do you know what his role was within wildlife?
He was a game warden.
A game warden?
Yes.
Okay. And did he direct you to any other wildlife experts for further discussion?
Yes, he did.
And do you recall that person's name?
I would have to look at my report for that.
Does the name Heather Johnson sound familiar?
That sounds correct.
All right, thank you, Judge. Thank you, sir. Were there ongoing searches up on Middle Mountain after the remains were found that you participated in?
Yes, there was.
And do you recall a search in May of 2014 that you participated in?
I do remember doing searches in 14.
Okay. Do you recall finding any items of interest during those searches in 2014?
I believe in 14, I found a end of a shoelace.
The end of a shoelace.
Yeah.
If I showed you photographs of it, would you recognize it?
Yes, I would.
It was 336, 337, and 338, please. Let me approach, Your Honor.
You may.
You recognize those photographs, sir?
I do.
What are they?
They are pictures of the end of what could be a shoelace.
Okay. And are they fair and accurate depictions of what you saw in the field on the day that you collected that item?
Yes.
Move to admit, 336, 337, 338.
Mr. Moran?
No objection, thank you.
They'll be admitted.
Thank you. Permission to publish, Your Honor?
Yes.
Can you use the pointer to show the jury on the screen where the item is located that you found? And we'll move to 337. Very good. 238. Thank you, sir. And you can have a seat. If I showed you the item itself, would you recognize it?
I would.
Move to approach with Exhibit 339.
You can.
Do you recognize that item, sir?
I do.
What is it?
It is the end of a possible shoelace.
Okay. Is that the same item you saw in the field when it was collected?
It is.
All right. Does it appear to be in the same or substantially the same condition as when you found it?
It does.
Move to admit 339.
Mr. Moran, do you object?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Submitted.
Thank you. During those searches that you continued, well, I should say, did you continue searching in the region while you were with the La Plata County Sheriff's Office?
I'm sorry,
Sure, it was a poorly worded question.
yeah.
Did you continue to do other searches
Yes, we did.
in this case?
Yes.
And did you yourself ever find any other items of interest?
Not that I recall.
And during your time searching up there, did you ever find any of the other personal items relating to Dylan Redwine?
No, I did not.
No further questions.
Cross?
Thank you, Your Honor. And may I retrieve that last piece of evidence that's provided?
Sure. As long as you don't go anywhere with it.
You bet.
There, not going anywhere farther
I
than
just want to make
that.
sure, I don't want it
Understood.
wandering off. As soon as you're done with it, it comes back up to the table.
Understood, sir. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to start with what I believe to be probably your first involvement, the first day you were involved. Is that November 21st, 2012? Or were you involved earlier?
Would actually have to refer to my report to get that date.
Sure.
It-
I'm comfortable with you doing so,
Okay.
as long as everybody else is.
Go ahead.
Yes.
So you were in touch with Mr. Redwine that day to inquire after what time he was at his employer, United Pipeline. Is that right?
Correct.
And part of that is just to confirm his whereabouts, to check in and see if what he told you checks out. Is that right?
Yes.
And on that day, as part of your follow-up after speaking with Mr. Redwine, you were in contact with employees at United Pipeline, right?
Yes.
And you were in,
Your Honor, this is beyond the scope.
Mr. Moran?
this was impeachment, and the foundation was laid with Sean Boris, but this informs the investigation that.
But I understand where you're going with it. I understand what you're doing. This was the prosecution witness, and that wasn't talked about.
That's fine, Judge. I'm not going to object to that line of
All right,
questioning.
go ahead.
Anyway, you remember speaking with a gentleman by the name of Sean Boris.
Yes.
And if it's been too long, that's fine. We can refer to your report again. But I'm going to ask you something fairly specific about what was going on in your conversation with Mr. Boris. He told you on November 21st, 2012, that he had in fact seen Mr. Redwine at the office on November 19th, 2012.
Yes.
And you inquired further, and Mr. Boris said he saw Mr. Redwine briefly, but did not speak with him, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Boris did not describe thinking that Mr. Redwine looked like he was in rough shape, did he?
Objection, Your Honor. I think we're beyond the scope of the impeachment.
I don't think so. I think it's okay.
Yeah, this was all foundation laid. Sir, is that accurate?
I'll have to check my report.
Sure, and it's the last, well, it's line 38 for me. I can point it out to you. It's the third paragraph from the bottom or so.
Hit one more time with the question, please.
Sure, it's in a minute. Mr. Brown, or Mr. Boris did not describe thinking that Mr. Redwine looked like he was in rough shape, correct?
He did not.
And he did not describe thinking that Mr. Redwine had been on a bender, right?
He did not.
Didn't say that Mr. Redwine looked pale and unshaven, haggard.
He did not.
And in the rest of that call that went on as part of your involvement in this investigation, you spoke with other employees and did not develop anything of evidentiary value in speaking with them. Is that fair?
Correct.
With respect to the tip of a shoelace that we see here, and this was something you found, as I understood it.
Yes.
This, when it was found, was placed in this plastic or paper bag. Is that right? Is that how it's done?
I would have to see the
Sure.
bag again.
And the other thing I'll inquire after as you look at the bag again is that it would include the date, the person who found it or recovered it, and the description of it along with GPS coordinates. So, may I approach?
Yes. That's correct.
Rather than asking all of that question again, would you just describe what's on the bag? Thank you.
The bag describes what was found, GPS coordinates, case number, and date and time.
Also, the GPS coordinates, did you say
Yes.
that? I was looking at something. Pardon me if I missed that. You mentioned this a little bit on direct, but you filled out a search warrant so that Mr. Redwine's phone could have a tap on it. Is that right?
Was collecting phone records, yes.
Good. It's a tap and pen register. Is that right? Or is that
Hold on. There's a difference between the two. A tap is a whole different deal.
All right. Your Honor would know better. I just wanted to check
So
if
pen
this was
register is
the right
probably
one.
what the search warrant was. All right.
Okay. That may be another witness. I'll move on. So, in an effort to be thorough and follow up, you went after psychic tips, right?
Correct.
And as I understood it, that shoelace that's in front of you wasn't found until 2014. Is that right?
Correct.
And it was found sort of in the general area where other items had been collected, a shoe and some other bones?
Correct, in the general area.
When the language that the prosecution used around this question on direct was that the sheriff's office followed up on tips that were outlandish. Do you remember that question?
There was some tips that were not your normal style tips.
And those were tips that sheriff's office resources were dedicated to following up on, right?
Yes, we did follow up.
And that diverted resources from Middle Mountain and the area where items were found as far out as 2014, right?
Say that one more time, please.
Sure. I mean, an officer who's following an outlandish psychic tip can't be up on Middle Mountain looking for things like you found in 2014, the shoelace tip. Fair?
Correct, during certain times of the year, for sure.
During that period, while those resources were being directed or diverted in that way, was anybody watching Mr. Redwine?
Not to my knowledge.
Were professionals brought in to excavate on Middle Mountain? Anthropologists?
Yes,
Okay. How long did they spend out there?
that I don't know.
Did they train sheriff's officers on what to do and how to collect evidence in that area where several items of evidence had been recovered?
I don't know if there was anything like that done. I was not a part of that.
There was some brief mention of that at first the warrant with respect to the phone didn't work, right?
Correct.
It had to be redone because there was an error. Is that right?
In the dates, yes.
And just to be clear, that's the phone records, correct?
Yes, if I wasn't clear, beg your
Okay,
pardon.
'cause there's
That's what I'm talking about.
There's a difference.
On November 23rd, 2012, that was the date that you had the San Juan County, New Mexico Sheriff's Office flying around the area of Vallecito. Is that right?
I would have to check my records for the exact date.
Sure. I believe it's on page 23. It's line 20.
Go ahead.
If you have that, I can provide a copy as well if you don't.
Yeah, that's correct.
And that helicopter was flying over the reservoir. Is that right?
On the 24th.
Okay. And one of the reasons that you were aware of to direct those resources at Lake Vallecito was because there had been dog alerts on the water.
I don't remember.
My notes show that on
I'm not gonna let you go any more about dog alerts. If you have something else, that's fine.
my notes show that on December 4th, 2012, you were in the air with the helicopter from San Juan County Sheriff's Office. Do you remember that?
I was not in the helicopter.
This is sort of a minor point. I'd prefer to just refresh your recollection if that's all right with everybody. May I approach with a report that was written by Mr. Gabbard or Ranger Gabbard?
And what's this about?
And he was in
I'm
the air on
objecting.
December 4th.
Well, hold on, okay? I asked him what it's about, and then I was gonna get to you, so that way you'll know whether or not you're objecting to that, okay? What's it about?
That he was in the air with San Juan County, New Mexico Sheriff's Office helicopter searching the area on December 4th, 2012.
What's your objection?
Relevance.
The prosecution was inquiring after the searches that were being conducted by air. This is follow-up on that in the brief.
Right, but why do we care if he was there or not?
Well,
I mean,
I care now because he said that he's not, and because I've been challenged on it by the prosecution. I was mentioning it's a minor point, but
I'm not gonna let you do it, just move on.
New Mexico State Patrol also assisted by sending a dive team, right?
Correct.
And that was on November 12th, or November 25th, 2012.
That sounds correct.
And you were out there, observed the dive team create a grid for searching Vallecito Lake
I assisted from the shore.
and saw the divers entering the water.
I did.
And then you were interrupted to take a report from a psychic. Right?
I would have to review my report on that. I'm sorry.
Halfway down the page.
Correct.
On November 26th, back on the dam with the dive team, is that right? We come from page 35.
Correct.
And took another report from a psychic, right?
I am not finding that.
At this point, I'm gonna object. This is a waste of time. Under 403.
Mr. Moran?
I'll move on.
Thank you. And please don't, tell the jury what you're thinking. That's what, when I made the pretrial ruling about speaking objections, it goes to responses too. All right? The editorial comments are not allowed. You stop it. It's not the first time people have done it today.
On December 20th, 2012, you went out to Mr. Redwine's house with a dog team, right?
I don't recall that. I'll have to look.
Objection, Your Honor, this is beyond the scope of direct.
This is beyond the scope.
This witness testified about his involvement in a very thorough investigation. This is follow-up on that same issue.
It's beyond the scope. Particularly with the pretrial hearings we've had and some previous conversations with the bench. If there's going to be dog evidence, those handlers can testify and you can talk about it then. So move on.
This is a precipient witness to what occurred.
This is, so now you're telling me something different? Then, and what, how does this help you advance your case?
I don't want to make a speaking account of what this would show.
I don't see how this helps you advance the case. So it's beyond the scope. You can keep him under subpoena if you need him later.
That's what we'll be required to do, and I'm afraid that would cause delay, but we can
Well,
re-subpoena
everything,
him.
it seems to me, is causing delay today for a lot of different reasons. If it's required, that's what's going to happen. Move on.
On June 28th, 2012, do you recall going to a vigil for Dylan Redwine at Eagle Park?
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope.
This informs the investigation. This investigator is chasing down psychic tips and working with dive teams and helicopter teams. The thoroughness includes the work done at this
Sustained.
juncture.
Objection sustained.
You followed Mr. Redwine into New Mexico so his truck could be seen.
Objection, Your Honor, beyond the scope. Counsel is well aware of the scope of direct examination.
I am. This is the investigation, but this
Okay, this is
investigator.
all beyond the scope, Mr. Moran. If you want to call him back in your case, you can do that.
Do you recall a conversation with Mr. Redwine in April?
Objection,
Well,
beyond the
we
scope.
don't even know when it was, do we? Let me
I didn't bring
question
up-
first,
I'm sorry, I did not bring up any conversations with Mark Redwine in this case.
and I don't remember any. So, Mr. Moran, unless you have something within the scope, you're going to have to save everything else for later.
the animal scat that you testified about on direct examination, do you recall, whether it was ever tested to see which sort of animal predator it came from?
I do not recall that.
So we're gonna have to, keep him. That's all I have.
Any redirection?
Yes. Ranger Gabbard. Were you aware that Mr. Sean Boris spoke to multiple investigators after speaking with you in the case?
Was not aware.
And do you recall that your conversation with him appears to be very short?
Yes, it was.
And you didn't conduct a thorough and detailed interview with him, did you?
I did not.
When you sought out the records from CenturyLink, you said that you requested a search warrant?
Correct.
And did you receive a court order to receive those records from CenturyLink?
I did.
No further questions.
Anything from the jury? Okay, you're done with the prosecution. Talk to Mr. King on your way out, so he has your contact information in case they want to call you back. Yep. All right. Your next witness?
People call Tanya Galbraith to the stand.
All right. So this does not have to be on the record. We do have a hard stop at 5, so if there's a place around 5, before 5 that you think is a good place to stop, let us know.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Come on up to the witness stand, please. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Have a seat.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi,
How are you today?
fine, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Can you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
I'm Tanya Galbraith.
And how do you spell your name for the record?
First name is Tonya, last name is Golbricht.
Thank you. And what do you do, ma'am?
I am a deputy for La Plata County Sheriff's Office,
Okay. How long have you been with La Plata County Sheriff's Office?
approximately 18 years.
All right. And you actually took a little time away from the sheriff's office, is that right?
Yes,
And when was that?
in 2017 to 2018.
And prior to departing in 2017, what was your rank?
I was a lieutenant of the criminal investigations unit,
And as a lieutenant, what were your responsibilities?
supervising the investigators and criminal investigations. And I also took cases and on call.
And why did you leave? Just briefly.
I thought I was ready to retire.
Okay. Did you end up returning back to the sheriff's department?
Yes, I did.
And within the sheriff's department, when you return, even after a short absence, do you retain your rank or is that not mandatory?
No, I started back at the bottom on patrol.
And that's why you're currently a deputy?
Yes.
So back in 2012, what was your role within the Plata County Sheriff's Department?
I was a sergeant investigator and I handled cases.
Okay. Did you have any involvement in this case involving Dylan Redwine's disappearance?
Yes.
What was your role?
I was a supporting investigator. Usually when cases like this come out, it's all hands on deck.
Okay. And you're sort of soft-spoken, as I'm sure you know. So if you wouldn't mind just making sure to scoot in just a little closer if you can, or just speak louder into the microphone. Tell us about how your involvement in this case began.
Well, I initially wasn't in town when this all started. I was on vacation. When I returned, my first involvement was with a meeting with some of Dylan, Elaine Redwine, Crystal Gilliam.
Was Mike Hall present in any of those early meetings?
Not this first one.
And early on in this investigation, did you take any steps to investigate Elaine Redwine? Okay.
Flows from
During this meeting.
They were stressed, tired, honestly looked a little dirty.
During this meeting.
Very tired, overwhelmed. everything I would imagine somebody would look like in this situation.
Was there any crying during the meeting?
Yes,
From who?
mainly Elaine.
Other displays of emotion besides crying that you can recall?
Yes, there's some anger.
During these early days of the investigation, did you have contact with Mark Redwine as well?
No,
During these early days of the investigation, did you make effort to contact
I can't help.
Correct.
Yes, it does. I probably can't memorize them that fast, though.
That's okay. Let me ask you a little bit about the process. What was the process that you went about in trying to get these phone records?
Well,
Search warrants I wrote
to satisfy them.
And did you get records relating to, telephone number, one moment, please, ending in 5448 from Verizon?
Yes,
And do you know whose phone number that was?
that was Dylan Redwine's phone.
Did you get records from, AT&T for a telephone number, ending in 8032?
Yes,
And do you know what records that related to? What
Mark
person?
Redwine, sorry.
I'm sorry, what person that related to?
Mark Redwine.
Do you know whether that was a personal phone number or a work phone or home phone? Do you know anything?
I believe it was his personal phone.
And did you get records from AT&T ending in telephone number 8303?
Yes,
And can you tell us what phone number, what person that number associates to?
Brian Nava.
If I might come and collect that document. Did you also seek out phone records relating to Elaine Hall, Corey Redwine, and Mike Hall?
No, I did not.
Are you aware of whether they actually gave their records to law enforcement?
I believe they voluntarily handed their devices over to our IT department to be downloaded, so I didn't have to write warrants for them.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of the term in law enforcement known as a tower dump?
Yes.
What is a tower dump? Please describe that for the jury.
A tower dump is, when a tower is dumped, it provides information for all cell phones that are in a certain area where those towers are located. It provides information for those cell phones in a certain period of time that it's requested.
And did you request a tower dump in this case?
Yes.
And which tower were you seeking records from?
There was one for AT&T and one for, I believe it's called Newstar/ComNet. Is that, no?
Why did you seek records from those towers?
Those were the towers that were located in Vicedo area.
Are there other towers, to your knowledge, in 2012, were there other towers in that area?
No,
Those are the only two towers up there.
that I was aware of.
Did you in fact receive those records that you sought, both for the phones and for the tower dump?
Yes,
And did you review, those records yourself?
Some of them.
Okay. Did you find any evidence of any communication from Dylan Redwine after November 18th, 2012?
No.
As part of your work in this case, were you able to isolate or identify a telephone number belonging to Mark Redwine's attorney?
Yes.
And how did you go about that?
That was an interesting experience. I found the phone number in Mark's records for November 19th, 2012. I wanted to find out who that phone number belonged to, and I had our crime analyst run the number in a search system that we have. And it came back to a woman that didn't end up being who we were looking for. And I went back and looked at the number, and I had transposed the last two, or the crime analyst transposed the last two numbers, and it just happened to, that was his attorney's number,
How did you know it was his attorney's number?
because I called the number.
Okay. Did you have a conversation with that person?
Yes, I did, and I called asking, I would think I was looking for a woman by the name of Beverly McAllister, and I asked for that person. This woman on the other line said, no, you have the wrong number, and I said, okay, and hung up. And then I'm looking at the number, and I asked her how long she had the phone, and she said 1.5 years. So I was confused. I went back and looked at the number that our crime analyst had ran and saw that the last two numbers were switched. So then I called her back again, and I advised who I was, why I was calling her, and asked if she knew who Mark Redwine was. And she said that she didn't feel comfortable talking about that.
Okay. Were you able to determine eventually that this was her attorney, his attorney, excuse me?
Yes.
Okay. I want to change topics with you. We're going to talk briefly, well, for a couple of minutes about tips and tips that may have come into law enforcement in the early stages and throughout the case. Did you receive any tips regarding this case?
Yes.
And how would you describe the volume of tips in the early stages?
They were coming in waves, lots of tips.
Okay. How did law enforcement go about handling these tips?
They would be assigned to investigators, patrol deputies. We even pulled somebody off patrol to come and handle just tips. So they just kind of got divvied up between people that had time to do it.
Do you know how many tips came in over the course of this case?
906 plus.
Plus, meaning more than 906?
I imagine there's more, but at least 906.
At least 906, okay. Were some of those tips that came in from psychics?
Yes.
And how did you treat those types of tips?
We treated all the tips the same,
Why is that?
because if I ever found myself sitting here for this case, I wanted to be able to confidently say that we did everything we could.
Do you recall a tip regarding a sighting of Dylan Redwine in Moriarty, New Mexico?
Yes,
Was that, to your knowledge, was that tip run to ground?
yes,
Run to ground. That's fine. And do you recall a tip coming in from a local gas station?
vaguely.
Okay, what do you remember about that?
I remember somebody calling in a tip saying that they thought they saw Mark and Dylan in an altercation at the gas station. Maybe Mark pulling Dylan into a vehicle, but it was later determined that that wasn't, it was different people, not Mark, not Dylan.
Okay. Do you remember a tip coming in from a woman by the name of Angela Lee?
Yes,
Tell us about that.
She is a postal worker that works in Vicedo, and she believes that she,
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor, we will have additional witnesses coming in. I believe defense probably will too, to discuss this matter. My purpose in requesting the basic outlines of this information was to describe the investigative steps taken by Investigator Goldbright to track this tip down.
So it's being offered to show why this part of the investigation occurred.
Yes, Your Honor.
You're not believing that this is correct.
That is also true.
So it's not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. Is that correct?
Yes.
Then it's not hearsay.
It's being offered to rebut. Permission to make a record at the bench, because Your Honor doesn't like it when we get into our factual
No, I
hypotheses.
know exactly what you're going at. I think it makes sense to have it at this now. You can still do what you intend to do. I mean, we've had hearings on this issue, not specifically whether or not how it would be addressed by the DA. So I'm going to allow it to go forward. I don't think you need to come make a record.
I'd ask,
It's pretty obvious. If you want to make a record at the end of the day, you can.
my other request is that it not be characterized as a tip, as we've all spoken about just now. This was a full-blown investigation regarding this information from Angela Lee, not a tip on the phone. I think that misrepresents the state of the evidence.
Didn't it come, that I don't know. They can refer to it how they want. You can refer to it as they should. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can
And
you
in
give,
fact, I don't want to do it at the end of the day. I know my court reporter has to be somewhere. So that's the problem. Why don't you come up and make your record? But if you're gonna come up, I want you to come up. Go ahead.
Investigator Goldbright, we're going to get into that topic at a later time. So I'm going to shift topics with you. I want to talk with you a little bit about searches and searches that were done in the case. Can you describe the search efforts that were made in the early part of the investigation to the best of your knowledge?
On Middle Mountain,
As you see fit. Just some of the searches at the beginning from what you recall.
okay. We did a lot of little searches here and there, some of them based off tips, some off of other reasons. But in the early stages, on Middle Mountain, we started, myself and Roy Vreeland were at the very bottom of Middle Mountain, and we did about 8-mile search at the bottom.
And do you recall that search occurring in May of 2013?
Yes,
And do you recall, you said the bottom of Middle Mountain, kind of, is there a particular road or area that was part of that search?
yes, it's called Tucker-Lane, and it's towards the end of the road. We parked and searched that area.
Okay, if I showed you a map of that area, would you recognize it?
Yes,
Exhibit 500? Does that look familiar?
yes,
Is that a fair and accurate representation of that search?
yes, it is.
Move to introduce Exhibit 500.
Any objection?
No objection.
It'll be admitted.
Thank you. Motion to publish, Your Honor?
Yes.
Can you show the jury what we're talking about here?
Yes.
There's a pointer, and if you're going to stand up, please speak into the microphone next to the television.
Okay, the area that was
Pointer
searched.
extends to, if you want.
This area highlighted here in like this pinkish purple color is where we searched that day.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
That's fine. Did you find any items of evidence related to the case in that search?
No.
You can have a seat. Did you participate in a search of Middle Mountain in June of 2013?
Yes.
Can you tell us about how that search came together, the plan behind it?
Well, we put together groups of people that consisted of law enforcement, so La Plata County Sheriff's Office, Durango Police Department, Durango Fire, Upper Pine, Search and Rescue, and other private search agencies that were willing to help.
And if I showed you a map, a topographical map of that area, would you recognize it?
Yes.
Before I go there, just a very brief foundational question. Were there, in fact, remains relating to Dylan Redwine found during those searches?
Yes.
If I may approach with Exhibit 224, please.
Yes.
Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And how would you describe it?
It is a map of the Vicedo area, and it depicts Mark's house, Middle Mountain Road, and some of our search area.
Is it a fair and accurate description of what it displays?
Yes.
Move to admit Peoples 224.
No objection.
224 is admitted.
Permission to publish?
Yes.
There's a circle on the left side of the map with a text box. What does that text box display in that circle?
Mark Redwine's house.
And then towards the center and above the previous circle, there's a circle and a text box. What does that display?
The recovery site, the first recovery site
First recovery
for
site.
Dylan's remains.
Okay. And Investigator Galbraith, are you familiar with how to interpret topographical maps?
Somewhat.
Okay. How would you describe this area where the remains were found, the first recovery site?
Steep, rugged, lot of ground cover, down trees, loose boulders, treacherous in parts.
And we see a red line that is traveling through the screen. What's on that red line?
That is Middle Mountain Road.
We also see a purple line that intersects with that red line. What does that denote? To your knowledge. If you don't know, that's fine.
That's the entry point, Bear Creek entry point, I believe.
Let me ask you this question. On Middle Mountain Road, there at the recovery site, is there also an ATV trail that intersects?
Yes,
Is that consistent with where that purple line is located?
yes.
Is there a gate on Middle Mountain Road below the recovery site, number one?
There is,
Is that red arrow consistent with the location of the gate?
yes.
As we look at that map, we see the circle, the top right quadrant of that circle seems to be covering an area where the lines are coming much closer together. What does that indicate to you?
Steep. It gets steeper.
And is that how you recall that area when you were there in person?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about the search on in June of 2013. Do you recall when it began?
The date,
The date?
the 24th, I believe,
Okay.
23rd.
Would it help? Do you remember or you're not sure?
I'm not sure.
Oh, that's
We did
fine.
a lot of searches.
Okay, that's fine. Would it help to look at your report?
Sure. Actually, I believe it was the 22nd through the 26th.
The 22nd through the 26th?
And then there was one search before that on the 21st. That was just Roy and I.
Okay. Did the search on the 21st produce any evidence related to the case?
No,
And on the 22nd, did the search produce evidence relevant to the case?
yes.
What occurred on the 22nd, to your recollection?
A black Nike Jordan shoe and a youth size 7 was located, and a Fila sock.
What was done with those items after they were found?
They were documented and collected, and then they were presented to Mike Hall and Corey Redwine for identification.
Were you present when that occurred?
Yes,
Can you describe how that process played out?
they did not touch the items, but they did look at them and positively ID'd them as belonging to Dylan.
How would you describe their demeanor during this interaction?
At first in shock, and emotion, even somewhat a little bit of happiness, just because we felt like maybe we were in the right spot.
All right. Your Honor, I'm at a convenient stopping point. I do need to make a record as well prior to 5 p.m.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna take a break at this point for the rest of the day. You know my admonitions, and I'll probably quit reading them to you at some time, but I'm gonna go through them today. Please don't discuss this case amongst yourselves or with anyone else during the course of the trial. Do not initiate, post, or respond to anything about the case on social media. In fairness to the parties of the lawsuit, you should keep an open mind throughout the trial and reach your deliberation only during final decision, or reach your decision only during, your final deliberations. Do not permit any third person to discuss this case in your presence. If they persist in doing so, please report that to me. Do not attempt to gather any information on your own. Do not engage in any outside reading on this case. Do not visit any places mentioned in the case. Do not read about the case in the newspaper. Obtain information about it from radio, television, internet, social media, or any other media source. Do not in any way try to learn about the case outside courtroom conditions. We'll go with the same as we've been doing. I want you back at 10 to 8. Hopefully, we'll start right at 8 or a few minutes thereafter. We'll go to about 5:15 tomorrow. But we do have a couple questions to ask you, Mr. Stein, if you want to stay behind for just a short period of time while everybody else is leaving. And then when we're done, since you're going to be gone, Cindy, I'll accompany Mr. Stein down, or I'll have a recording for you. Okay? All right. Everybody ready to adjourn this? All right, I need to step down this over. You don't have to stay for this if you don't want to. So we can be seated. So, Mr. Stein, first of all, thank you for speaking up about what you noticed. That's, I guess, no good deed goes unpunished because you're still here. In any event, you indicated to the bailiff that you were familiar with or you knew Mr. Thank you, Patterson. I was going to call him by a different name. It was going to be totally wrong. Could you describe that a little bit for us? Okay. So you didn't know him well enough to recognize the name then? Anything about the nature of that relationship that's going to cause you to give his testimony either greater or less weight than you would other witnesses? And I had another question, just a second, I lost it. Could you describe, in terms of walking by him, I mean, was that pretty much it? You didn't actually work with him other than him doing security, is that? Okay, all right. Does either side wish to inquire? One question. Sure.
If Mr. Patterson's testimony, to your recollection, doesn't match another witness's testimony that's contradictory, based upon working in this, as you've described with Mr. Patterson, are you more inclined to believe Mr. Patterson's testimony just because of that prior relationship or prior seeing him every day at work?
Okay, and I'm assuming there's not going to be any motions? Is that fair to say or not?
Not at this moment, no.
Okay. All right. With that, we'll be in recess till tomorrow. I want you to work on the exhibits, because we have so many today, and then I'll come back and work with you. So I'll take Mr. Stein down just to make sure he gets in and out of the building.
All right,
Yes. Oh, sure.
We got a juror here if we're gonna start making records.
Can you do it in the morning? All right, well then, can you just wait outside for me? Record can reflect the deputy's gonna go out with him just to make sure he doesn't get contacted by anybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. I'll be brief. I'm sure the court was surprised on the objection and then surprised that objection.
Sure.
Rule 902 reads as follows: extrinsic evidence of authenticity of conditions precedent. Extrinsic evidence of authenticity as a condition precedent to admissibility is not required with respect to the following. That's in the CRE now. Go down to 11 and explain that the original duplicate domestic records for subject the admissible under 6 if accompanied by an affidavit of custodian or other qualified person in manner complying with property in discovery. Then finally, it says a party intending to offer a record in the evidence under the paragraph must provide written notice of that intention to all adverse parties. Must make the record and affidavit available for inspection sufficiently in advance of their offering to evidence to provide an adverse party a fair opportunity to challenge.
Your Honor, if I may, we'll
No,
stipulate all that.
hold on,
I
hold on.
agree.
No, not yet. I mean, I'm agreeing too, so far. But the rule doesn't say anything about that they have to object in advance, and I didn't know if there's any case law on it, is there?
No, Judge, I was unable to find the case directly on the time of the objection. However, what I can tell the court is that the whole purpose of the rule is the objection to practice. The purpose is that you be blinded to
Oh, I understand all that. I understand all that. My problem is the attestation says, this is the record attached. It's not attached, and it has no other identifying, documents or way to identify it, and that's what my problem is.
become electronic. And that's not, I can tell the court that we filed a notice that what we're saying in the notice is that the records were coming from our expectation is to advance for trial. So we filed this back in March. We filed multiple updates. Just for those reasons, we do the objection to the time. Well, we have to take the reality of the situation. I know that listed on that. Provided in defense, the defense on page 18 of 646 discovery.
So where does it say centrally on that, on the declaration of the custodian? Because I looked for that, and again, oh, it does say, I missed it. I was looking at the body of it.
And so, Judge, we could go witness by witness and call the investigators that we fit, but the purpose of the notice is that it's objection to all that stuff. You know, our additional witnesses, etc. So I'm just asking for it to review that we gave that notice, consider whether it's an objection to the time. The witness had it in discovery for probably years. We'd like to proceed with our trial presentation on that instruction. So I'm just flagging it now and, what, over, I think, file all.
All right, I will state that it's been 19 years that I've been a judge, almost 19 years. And back in the old days, they were always attached, which is why I didn't know they were coming now electronically, just to keep them from being attached. And are you stating as an officer of the court that this is the attestation for these records from Central?
Yes, Your Honor. I believe that any that we, and counsel corroborate, is accurate, but my understanding is Captain is alcoholic, and every phone company has a panel that we get an attestation of specific records. The other investigators will need to know that. But any that we put in,
And the rule actually talks about a company, it doesn't talk about attached, it's just the attestation. So, Mr. Moran, anything that you want to say about whether or not it should have been?
No, I mean, I think that the notice is so that we can prepare to meet it if it's properly provided. What we've got is what was handed to us in the middle of this examination. Well, unless we dig through, are we at thousands of pleadings yet? At any rate.
Well, you're at 18,646 in terms of discovery numbers, which I agree is probably a couple of years old. And I don't know how high they went. I know it up about 25,000.
Above 28,000 now, I think. So, at any rate, that document by itself tells us nothing, and that's what was handed to us in the middle of that examination, and it's not connected to anything. And
Can you tell me what the, Mr. Johnson, or Mr. Champagne, I don't care who has the records, what are the discovery numbers of the records?
I have it here, Judge. But I would also note,
Could you answer my question, and then you can say what you want to say? Maybe.
If I may,
No, I want this question answered and then we can talk.
18,646 to 18,654.
So it's right next to each other, just here. It's coming in.
understood. My record is that the declaration's got to be signed in a manner that if falsely made would subject the maker to criminal penalty. Sorry, Aaron. And that the notice requirement is to provide fair opportunity to challenge properly attested documents. And
Right.
that's not what we've got, so that's the basis of our objection.
Well, that's a slightly different objection, but 335 is under penalty of perjury. It's sworn before a notary. And it's also cites 28 USC 1746, which I don't know what it says, but I assume that's something important. So with that, 335 will go into the court exhibit, and 334 or 336, I don't remember which one. Thank you, they're both admitted. And as soon as I do that, we'll be off the record. So we are off the record.
Thank you, Judge. Just, I'm sorry to briefly
I
complete.
guess we're back on the record.
I apologize, Your Honor. Just to complete this process, there are going to be several other sets of records coming in under this same
I
zip
think
browser.
I've made clear what I'm gonna do.
Thank you, Judge.
All right. You're on his way. So I'll take care of this. Thank you very much.